The sound was unbearable. It wasn't just a cry, it was a siren, a howl, a desperate call that echoed down the pristine corridors of New York Presbyterian Hospital. Nurses exchanged weary glances, doctors murmured in hushed frustration, and families in nearby rooms looked on with sympathy and discomfort. The source of the commotion was a newborn, only 3 days old, who hadn't stopped crying since the moment he was brought into the world.
Noah Reynolds. Born into unimaginable wealth.
Son of Michael Reynolds, tech mogul, billionaire entrepreneur, and widower. The nursery was a fortress of state-of-the-art machines, muted beeping monitors, and a roomful of sterile expertise. But none of it mattered. For 48 straight hours, the baby's cries had been relentless, primal. A soft pink beanie perched crookedly on his head, his tiny fists curled tight, his face flushed from hours of wailing. And standing in the center of it all, surrounded by a medical team that had run out of answers, was Michael. He looked like a man freshly carved from stone, rigid, sharp, cold, but breaking. His designer suit was wrinkled and slept in. His tie hung loose like a noose he forgot to remove. His once polished shoes bore scuff marks from pacing the same 6-foot stretch of hospital tile. Michael Reynolds, the man who sold software that powered half the world's banking systems, who closed multimillion-dollar deals over espresso and silence, stood frozen, useless, helpless before the one thing he couldn't fix. His son. Crying. Alone. "I don't understand," he snapped, voice low but cracking. "You're telling me no one here can make it stop?" Nurse Rachel stepped forward carefully. She had been on rotation for nearly 16 hours and looked as worn down as the rest of the staff. "Mr. Reynolds, we've ruled out every medical issue. His vitals are stable. No fever, no signs of infection, he's feeding." "Then why is he screaming like that?" Michael cut her off. His voice echoed louder than he intended. The baby's cry spiked higher in return.
Rachel hésitated.
"Sometimes, newborns feel loss, even if they can't understand it." Michael's face tightened. His jaw clenched as he stared at the glass crib. Inside, Noah's tiny chest heaved with each sob. His fingers clawed at the air, seeking something, or someone, he couldn't name. "He's 3 days old," Michael muttered. "He doesn't even know what he's lost." But he did.
Because Michael knew.
Amelia had died just moments after giving birth, her hand in his, her lips smiling as if nothing could go wrong. Then suddenly, everything had.
À complication.
A hemorrhage.
À blink, à scream, à flatline. The love of his life, gone.
The woman who softened him, who teased the human out of the machine, who sang lullabies weeks before the baby arrived, who wrote love notes on post-its stuck to the bathroom mirror, gone. Now it was just him. And Noah.
And the crying. God, the crying.
He backed away from the crib and collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands.
IVE built satellite.
"Whole infrastructures," he whispered hoarsely. "And I can't help my own son." Nurse Rachel knelt beside him. "He doesn't need infrastructure, sir. He needs presence. Warmth.
Familiarity." Michael looked bitterly.
"So what do you want me to do, hold him and sing lullabies?"
"I'm not her."
"No," she said gently. "But you're what's left." The words landed with a dull thud in his chest. Michael stood and approached the crib again. Noah's screams were hoarse now, his voice breaking, but still unrelenting. Michael reached a hand toward the child, then pulled it back, uncertain. Afraid. Was this what it meant to be a father?
Repanique, disconnexion, inadéquatie?
The doctors had left the room, defeated. Only Rachel remained, standing silently by the door, watching him with eyes full of something close to pity. "I don't know how to do this," Michael admitted. "No one does. Not at first." Outside the nursery, visitors whispered as they passed, stealing glances through the glass.
Everyone in the ward knew the story. The Reynolds baby. The one who wouldn't stop crying.
The billionaire who lost his wife. Some felt sad. Some felt judgment. Others, curiosity. But no one had a solution. Until, from the far end of the hallway, came a pair of footsteps no one expected. Slow. Uneven.
Out of place.
Rachel turned first. Her eyes widened. A woman stood at the entrance. She was disheveled. Black. In her mid-30s, maybe younger, but life had aged her faster. Her clothes were layered but tattered, a once brown coat stained at the collar, sleeves too long, boots too thin for fall in New York. A canvas bag hung from her shoulder, fraying at the seams. But it was her eyes that drew the room still. Fixed. Calm. Knowing. The security guard at the reception desk rose immediately. "Ma'am, you can't be in this area." "She's homeless," someone muttered nearby. "Get her out," Michael said instinctively, turning away. But then, the woman spoke. Not loud. But clear. Steady. "He's not crying because he's in pain," she said. "He's crying because she's not here."
Michael froze.
The words struck deeper than any diagnosis. He turned to look at her, really look. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name is Ava," she replied. 6 months ago, I lost my son. He cried like that too. Not because he was sick. Because he missed me."
Silence fait les vies.
Ava stepped forward, but stopped at the threshold. She didn't want to invade. She wasn't here to take. Only to offer. Michael's throat tightened.
"You lost your son."
She nodded. "Pneumonia. I didn't have insurance. They turned me away." I held him in my arms until his chest stopped rising. Michael's eyes flicked to Noah.
Still crying.
Still alone. "Let me hold him," Ava said.
Juste for a minute.
"Maybe he'll feel what's missing." Michael stared at her. Dirty. Tired.
A stranger.
A stranger who somehow knew exactly what he feared most. That no one, not even him, could give Noah what Amelia had. And yet, somehow, maybe she could. He didn't move. Didn't speak. But something in him cracked. And part of him whispered, "What if she's right?" For a long moment, no one moved. The hallway outside the nursery stood frozen, as if time itself was holding its breath. Nurses paused mid-step, orderlies stilled their carts, and even the ever-beeping monitors seemed to fade behind the sound of Noah's desperate cries.
Michael Reynolds stared at the woman standing in the doorway. Ava Thompson.
A name that meant nothing to him. A face that didn't belong in a place like this, a sterile white-walled medical sanctuary for the wealthy, the protected, the powerful. And yet, there she was, speaking truths no one else dared to.
You lost your son.
The words echoed in his mind, colliding with the memory of Amelia's last breath.
Michael's instinct screamed to shut it down.
To restore order. To call security. He was a man who solved problems by eliminating unpredictability, and Ava was nothing if not unpredictable.
Dirty boots. Rag de côte.
She didn't look like someone who should be anywhere near his child. And yet, her voice had cut through the chaos in a way that nothing else had. Not the best pediatricians in New York. Not machines with 6-digit price tags. Not the nurse's gentle reassurances. Just a woman who had known loss. "You can't be serious," Dr. Walters muttered from behind, finally stepping into the room. "Mr. Reynolds, we can't allow this. She's not authorized, she's not family, and we have no idea who she is." "She told you," Rachel said softly, eyes still fixed on Ava. "Her name is Ava Thompson." Dr. Walters turned to Rachel. "This is not a joke. This is a secure floor. We can't just let random people in off the street." "She's not just anyone," Rachel replied. "She's the first person who said anything that actually makes sense." Michael glanced between them all, Dr. Walters with his clipboard and credentials, his voice tinged with indignation, Rachel, calm but weary, standing in silent defiance, and Ava, who had stepped no further into the room, hands still at her sides, eyes locked on Noah. Then he looked at his son. Noah was red-faced, thrashing weakly, his tiny fists flailing in exhausted protest. His mouth opened in another sharp wail that hit Michael like a blade. He felt it physically, sharp and hollow in his chest. "I just want to help," Ava said again, softer this time. "I know I'm not supposed to be here.
You know how we look.
But I heard him from the sidewalk. That cry. I know it."
Rachel stepped forward. "Docteur. Walters, can I speak to you outside for a moment?"
The doctor scowled but followed her into the hallway. Inside the room, Michael remained, staring at Ava as if she were some kind of anomaly, neither threat nor savior, but something more complicated. Someone who existed in a space he didn't understand. He wasn't used to feeling unsure. You heard him from the street? Michael asked, voice low. I was passing by, Ava nodded. Something about the sound, it pulled me in.
You aid to hear it every night. Your son, Michael said.
Emmanuel, she replied.
Manny.
He was just 8 months old. Michael felt his throat tighten. I tried everything, Ava continued. Shelters, clinics, churches. But I was between jobs, between homes. One cold night, he started coughing. I went to the ER, and they said without insurance, I had to wait. He didn't make it until morning. Michael looked away. The hospital where they now stood had marble floors and espresso bars. The best neonatal care in the country. Ava had lost her child in a system that decided who deserved help and who didn't. I dropped out of med school to have him, she said quietly. That was the deal. I'd go back eventually. But life doesn't wait.
Michael exhaled slowly.
He didn't know what to say. What could he say? He had never needed to choose between rent and diapers. Never had to sleep in his car or plead with hospitals. His child had a whole wing of the hospital at his disposal, and still, the only person who seemed to understand him was this woman who had nothing left. Dr. Walters and Rachel returned. Mr. Reynolds, Walters began, tone firm, I must strongly advise against this. There are protocols. Liability issues. She won't hurt him, Rachel interrupted. And with all due respect, doctor, neither will she stand by and do nothing. Michael turned to Rachel.
You believe her?
I believe in grief, Rachel said. And I believe Noah is drowning in it. Michael looked at Ava again. She stood still, her expression unreadable. But her eyes, they weren't begging. They weren't desperate. They were tired. Honest. She wasn't asking for anything. Not food. Not money. Not shelter. Just a chance to hold a baby who had lost his mother. Maybe to feel a heartbeat against her own chest again. Maybe to give what she no longer had anywhere to place. Michael stepped aside. The room held its breath. Rachel moved to the crib, lifting Noah gently, his cries peaking as she passed him into Ava's waiting arms. Ava's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the child, but her grip was firm. She pulled him close, pressing his small frame against her chest, murmuring softly. It's okay, baby, she whispered, voice like worn velvet. I know.
Inuiturt. You Renault talon.
Noah shuddered, screamed once more. Then paused. A hiccup. Another. His fists, once clenched in fury, loosened. And then, quiet.
À slow, un certain silence.
Michael felt something punch through his ribs, a mixture of shock, relief, and something dangerously close to awe. Rachel turned away, wiping at her eyes. Even Dr. Walters had nothing to say. Ava stood there, gently rocking the baby, whispering words too low for anyone else to hear. Noah's cheek nestled against her collarbone, his tiny body finally at rest. The room was still, and yet it felt like something had shifted permanently.
Michael stepped forward slowly. How did you?
Ava didn't look at him. She was watching Noah, eyes shining. I didn't do anything, she said. He just needed someone to feel the missing piece. Michael swallowed hard. He had money, power, influence, but none of it had reached his son. And now, here was a stranger, carrying the weight of her own loss, giving his child what he could not. He didn't know what to feel. Only that he'd never forget the sound of his son's first silence. Michael couldn't stop watching her. Ava stood near the window now, gently rocking Noah in her arms. His tiny body, once rigid and screaming, now rested quietly against her chest. His breath had slowed to a rhythmic whisper, and the deep gasping sobs had finally ceased. His small hand clutched the collar of Ava's coat, anchoring himself to the only calm he had known since the moment he was born. Michael stood still, as if afraid that any sudden movement might break the fragile peace in the room. He felt like a ghost in his own life, a spectator to a scene he should have been part of. His son had cried for 2 days straight, and now, in the arms of a woman who had nothing, no medical credentials, no title, no home, he had found solace. It was both miraculous and humiliating. A part of him burned with gratitude. Another part burned with shame. Dr. Walters cleared his throat, trying to reclaim the room. Mr. Reynolds, I need to remind you that this situation is highly irregular. There are legal implications, health concerns, liability. We don't know her vaccination history, her mental state, her background. She has a name, Rachel said sharply.
It's Ava Thompson.
Dr. Walters turned toward her. Rachel, this is not the time for sentimentality. She shouldn't be here. And yet, Rachel said, motioning to Noah, she's the only one in this entire building who's been able to bring that baby peace. That doesn't make her safe, Walters shot back. It makes her lucky.
She's not lucky, Michael interrupted.
His voice was low, firm.
She's grieving.
Everyone turned to him. He took a slow step toward Ava, who still hadn't taken her eyes off Noah. Her rocking slowed, her humming soft, almost inaudible. I don't understand it, Michael continued. I don't know how someone with no connection to him, no training, no access, just walks in and knows what he needs. But she did. Ava looked up. I didn't know, she said simply. I just recognized the cry. It's the same one my Manny made when he was slipping away. It stays with you. Michael felt that weight settle again in his chest. The grief in her voice wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, lived in,
deep.
Rachel approached cautiously. Mr. Reynolds, I know this isn't how you pictured fatherhood beginning.
None of this is.
But Noah isn't responding to anything medical. He's responding to human connection. Maybe what he needs isn't something we can manufacture or prescribe. Michael looked at Rachel, then at Ava, then back at his son. He had spent his entire adult life building systems, efficient, logical, scalable systems. Problems existed to be solved. Failures were unacceptable. Weakness was a flaw to be debugged. But this wasn't a code to fix. It was a child. A life. And he was failing him. Not because he wasn't trying. But because he didn't know how to be soft. Ava sat down in the armchair, adjusting Noah in her arms. The baby shifted slightly, his cheek brushing against her neck. He sighed.
A small, fragile sound.
Michael took a breath and walked toward her. May I? Ava nodded and began to carefully transfer Noah into his arms.
Michael hesitated.
He had held him before, but always awkwardly, like cradling a porcelain artifact too valuable to touch. This time, it was different. Noah didn't scream. He whimpered, once. Then settled. Michael sat across from Ava, holding his son, feeling the warmth of his small body pressed against his chest. He stared at his son's face, delicate red, and still slightly damp from tears. He felt it then. The fear. Not the fear of failure, or judgment, or public scrutiny. He was used to those. This was different. It was the fear that his son would grow up not knowing comfort. That he would inherit only Michael's sharpness and none of Amelia's gentleness. That he would feel alone even in a room full of people. I don't know how to be enough for him, Michael said, eyes still fixed on his son. Ava's voice was steady. You don't have to be enough. You just have to be present. Michael looked up. She continued, I didn't get everything right. I didn't have much. But every day, Manny knew I was there.
Every cry, every giggle, every nap on my chest.
That was enough. Until it wasn't. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she composed herself quickly. I would give anything to feel him against me again. Even for one more second. Michael's eyes burned, but he didn't look away. I almost didn't stop, she said suddenly. What do you mean? When I heard him crying from the street, Ava said. I almost kept walking. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to feel anything again. But something in me said, maybe he needs someone who remembers. Michael sat back, the weight of her words settling over him like dust. He had always admired logic, reason, efficiency. But this wasn't any of those things. This was messy, raw, human. Rachel approached with a clipboard, hesitant. Michael, she said, using his first name for the first time. I know this is unconventional, but I think we should make an exception. Ava's not a risk. And Noah, he's made that clear. Dr. Walters groaned.
This is madness. No, Michael said softly. This is mercy.
He looked at Ava. You said you dropped out of med school? She nodded. Final year. Couldn't finish while raising him alone. Michael considered that for a long moment. Then quietly he said, "Would you want to go back?" Ava blinked, startled. "What?" "If you had the chance," he said. "Would you want to finish?" She stared at him, confused. "I'm not asking for anything." "I know," Michael said. "That's why I'm offering." Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full of possibility. Ava didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at Noah, now asleep in his father's arms. She smiled, just barely. "He's peaceful," she whispered. Michael nodded. "Thanks to you." For the first time in days, Michael held his son without trembling. Noah slept quietly in his arms, his cheek pressed against Michael's chest, the faint rise and fall of his tiny body in sync with his father's breath. The silence was not empty, it was profound. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. And that peace had come from a woman no one expected, no one trusted, and no one had even noticed until she stepped out of the shadows. Ava remained seated across from him, her hands folded in her lap, watching them with tired but steady eyes. The hospital room, once tense with anxiety, had transformed. The medical staff had stepped back. Dr. Walters had retreated in frustration, muttering something about risk assessments and liability waivers. Rachel stood quietly by the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes reflecting something like reverence. Michael looked at Ava again. "How did you do it?" he asked softly. Ava shook her head. "I didn't do anything special." "No. You did something no one else could." She glanced down at her hands. Sometimes grief recognizes itself. He wasn't just crying for her. He was crying to be understood. Michael looked down at his son. "And you understood him?" Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. He remembered what she said earlier, about the night she lost Manny. About how the hospital turned her away. He imagined her sitting in a car somewhere, holding her son as his breathing slowed, whispering comfort into the darkness, praying it wasn't real. She hadn't come here to help him. She didn't even know who he was. She came because the sound of a child in pain was louder than her fear of being turned away again. And now, here she sat, having given more than anyone else had. "I keep wondering," Ava said after a while, "what it would have felt like to walk out of that hospital holding my son instead of a blanket." Michael's chest tightened. "I used to think I failed him," she continued. "But maybe I didn't. Maybe the system did. Maybe the world did. But I held him until the very end. He didn't die alone." Michael swallowed hard. He looked at Noah, then back at Ava. "He's not going to grow up without knowing he was loved," he said. "Not if I can help it." "You can," Ava said. "But not by trying to be perfect. Just by being here." Michael nodded slowly. "I didn't think I could do this," he admitted.
Faterud.
Raising him alone. "You're not alone," she said. A pause passed between them. The weight of those words sank in deeper than either expected. Noah stirred slightly, adjusting his head. His eyelids fluttered, then relaxed. His breathing remained even. Michael looked around the room. The beeping of monitors continued softly in the background. The hallway beyond the glass window had resumed its usual rhythm, carts rolling, nurses walking, families speaking in hushed tones. And yet, inside this small room, everything had changed.
Rachel stepped closer, holding a small blanket.
"Here," she whispered, handing it to Michael. "You should try swaddling him while he's calm. It might help him sleep longer." Michael nodded and carefully adjusted the blanket around Noah's small body. His movements were more confident now, less mechanical. He looked up at Rachel. "Thank you for believing her."
Rachel gave a faint smile.
"It wasn't hard. Sometimes you just know." Ava stood slowly, stretching her legs. Michael noticed how unsteady she seemed, the way she favored one side slightly, the fatigue buried in her movements. "You must be exhausted," he said. She shrugged.
Amuse-toi.
"You shouldn't be," he replied. She met his gaze. There was no defensiveness in her eyes, only honesty. "I've learned to live without a lot," she said. "But that doesn't mean I want to."
Michael stood, still cradling Noah.
"About earlier. I wasn't just talking. I meant it. If you want to go back to school, if you want housing, stability, I can help.
No string attached.
Ava hesitated. Why? Because you helped my son when no one else could, he said.
Because you reminded me what matters.
Because I don't want to walk out of this hospital and pretend this never happened. Her jaw tightened slightly, as if guarding herself from disappointment. I've had people offer things before, she said. They always came with conditions. Not this time. She was silent for a long moment. Finally she said, if I say yes, it's not because I need saving. I know, Michael said.
It's because you deserve a chance.
Ava looked away, blinking quickly. She turned to Rachel. Can I have a few minutes alone?
Just, to say goodbye.
Rachel nodded and quietly ushered Michael out with her, leaving Ava alone with Noah once more. Ava sat beside the crib, lowering herself slowly into the chair. She looked down at the sleeping child, now swaddled and still, his tiny lips parting slightly with each breath. She leaned in close and whispered, You are loved. You may not remember her voice, but she's still with you.
In your heartbeat. In your eyes.
She reached into the canvas bag she carried and pulled out a small worn piece of fabric, a piece of her son's baby blanket. Faded blue, frayed at the edges. She tucked it gently beside Noah, beneath the corner of his swaddle. From one mother to another, she whispered. She pressed a soft kiss to the baby's forehead, closed her eyes, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and walked out of the room. Michael was waiting in the hallway. Ava met his gaze. I'll think about your offer, she said. But right now, I just need a place to sleep where no one is watching the clock. He nodded. We'll figure it out. One step at a time. Rachel handed Ava a small card. It's the number of a safe shelter. They know you're coming. We called ahead. Ava took it, holding it as if it were made of glass. As she walked down the hallway, Michael held Noah a little tighter. And for the first time since Amelia's death, he didn't feel entirely hollow. Somewhere between pain and hope, something had shifted. A stranger had reminded him how to be human. And a baby had taught him what it meant to be present. A week had passed. New York Presbyterian Hospital had returned to its usual rhythm. The cries of newborns came and went, the shuffle of nurses' shoes filled the corridors, and the quiet hum of machines blended into the sterile calm of the neonatal wing. But for those who had witnessed it, something still lingered. People still talked about the baby who wouldn't stop crying. About the billionaire father pacing the floors like a man lost in his own castle. And about the stranger, disheveled, homeless, and unexpected, who walked in and gave the child what no one else could. Michael Reynolds hadn't spoken publicly about it. He wasn't the kind of man who gave interviews or posted long captions on social media. But in quiet, visible ways, he had changed. He now spent hours with his son every day, learning to hold him not like a burden, but like a connection. He had asked Nurse Rachel to teach him how to bathe Noah, change his diapers, read his cues. He had even requested a chair be brought into the room so he could sleep near his son's crib at night. The man who once solved problems with money and power had started to solve them with presence. But Ava had disappeared. She had taken the shelter referral card Rachel gave her, thanked them quietly, and walked away. Michael hadn't seen her since. He didn't know if she had found safety, or comfort, or even peace. He only knew that the moment she stepped out of that hospital, something irreplaceable had gone with her. Michael had reached out to several organizations, offered anonymous donations to the shelter system, and even asked Rachel to discreetly keep an eye out. But there was no sign of Ava. Until one afternoon, as autumn leaves swirled outside the hospital entrance, Rachel approached Michael with a small envelope. She left this for you, Rachel said. It came this morning. Michael turned the envelope over in his hands. His name was written in neat, careful handwriting. Inside was a letter handwritten, on lined notebook paper. He sat down, unfolded it, and began to read. Michael, I wasn't sure whether to write. I've never been good at asking for things, and I'm still not. But I did want to say thank you. Not for the offer you made, but for listening. For seeing me. Most people don't. When you're on the street, you become invisible. You walk through crowds and it's like no one notices.
No eye contact. No conversation.
Sometimes you start to wonder if you're even still human. But that day, Your son cried in a way I couldn't ignore. And for a few minutes, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt like a mother again. I've thought about your offer. About school. About rebuilding. I'm not ready to say yes. Not yet. But I'm not saying no either. For now, I'm staying in a shelter downtown. It's not perfect, but it's safe. I've got a caseworker, and they're helping me get my ID replaced, checking in on my health, and even looking at programs to finish my degree. So maybe. Someday. But if I don't ever see you again, I want you to know this: your son felt loved that day. Not just by me, but by you. I saw it in the way you looked at him after he quieted down. I saw a father learning how to show up. That's more than most kids ever get. Be good to him. Tell him stories. Let him cry when he needs to. Let him laugh when he wants to. Let him feel everything. Don't close him off just because the world tried to do the same to you. And remember, he's not broken. He's just beginning. Ava. Michael finished reading, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into his coat pocket. He looked down at Noah, now nestled in a sling across his chest, asleep again. The child was growing. His face still carried the softness of newborn features, but there was something steadier in him now. He didn't cry as much. He responded to his father's voice. He relaxed when held. As if the storm had passed. Michael stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the city. He thought about all the people moving through those streets, heads down, hands in pockets, lost in their own noise. How many of them had stories no one would ever hear? How many had hearts still healing from something no one had seen? He thought about Ava, about how easy it would have been to ignore her. How close he had come to doing so. How dangerously close the world had come to turning its back on someone who had given everything she had left to a stranger's child. He thought about Amelia. Her laugh. Her voice. The way she had once placed his hand on her belly and said, "He's going to need the soft side of you, Michael. Don't bury it." Maybe Ava had helped him find it again. Later that day, Michael drafted an email. It was addressed to the hospital board, proposing a new initiative, a support program for mothers without access to prenatal care, including mental health services, temporary housing partnerships, and fast-tracked enrollment in job training or education. He titled it Manny's Fund, in honor of the child Ava had lost. He wasn't sure if she'd ever know. But it felt right. When the email was sent, Michael returned to Noah's side, lifting him gently into his arms. The boy blinked up at him, eyes wide, curious, trusting. "You won't remember any of this," Michael said softly. "But I will." He kissed the boy's forehead and held him close. Outside, the sun dipped low over the city skyline. The streets glowed amber. Leaves fluttered across sidewalks. And somewhere in a quiet shelter, a woman sat with a binder of school applications, a picture of her son tucked into the cover, and a memory of holding another child in her arms, just for a moment, but long enough to matter. Sometimes, the ones no one sees leave the deepest mark. And sometimes, the smallest moments carry the loudest echoes. The crying had stopped. But what it left behind would never be forgotten.